Loot crates and microtransactions are seemingly unavoidable right now, with a lot of new games having them in one form or another. They are quite different though where you look, and it's mainly loot crates that get the most hate right now. If we use two games as an example, Sea of Thieves as one and then perhaps CSGO as another. Even though Sea of Thieves has not launched yet, we know that it will have microtransactions and we know how they'll work. When they launch their premium store, you'll be able to buy cosmetic items with real money, but the key point here is that you'll know exactly what item you're buying and how much money it's going to cost. Loot crates, however, are very different. So in CSGO, you open a crate with a key that's around £1.80 and then you'll get a random skin from inside. It could be a super rare and possibly expensive skin, or it could be a really cheap and really bad looking one. That's the gamble. And well, that's also an interesting choice of words, because that's exactly what some countries or states in America are starting to think loot boxes are. Gambling. More on that in a minute. Microtransactions or MTX aren't exactly loved either. I personally don't care if a game offers cosmetic items at a cost, providing none of the items are game changing and I'm not forced to buy them. Other people though see this as a money grab and they want those items to be part of the base game content. You can see both sides of the story, but at the end of the day, games companies and publishers are also a business, so it's important to remember that. And Rare, for example, who are the developers of Sea of Thieves, said that they need the microtransaction model to keep updates going on the game over a number of years to stay in line and on track with their live update model. It's up to you whether you accept that reasoning or not, but microtransactions right now are at least the lesser of two evils. If we look at Star Wars Battlefront 2 as another recent example, I think we all know what happened there and the storm that engulfed the game's launch. Loot crates were purchasable that contained star cards that could be used to give your character or your ship a small advantage. The problem was though that the progression system was wrapped up in these crates and you gained cards, you gained crafting parts. Long story short, in some of the game modes, I'd say specifically in Starfighter Assault and Heroes vs Villains, the star cards that you could gain from buying crates had a big impact on gameplay, and while you could earn these cards in game by naturally playing and earning credits, the credits that you earned per game meant that it would take an incredible amount of time to get there. And if you weren't following along at the time, DICE and EA then removed the crates from the game because of the uproar. Now we know that at some point crates will be reintroduced to the game, and while some people won't be happy with loot crates regardless of what's in them, if they only share cosmetic items, it's at least not going to impact on the player's experience, and that's very important. Now I mentioned the term gambling earlier when referencing loot boxes, and it's a very interesting conversation because if you break it down, is this really gambling? Let's take a look. If you pay, say, £2 for a crate, but you've got no idea what you're going to get inside, then you are kind of gambling on what it's going to be. When it comes to CSGO, you almost certainly are, because the items that you gain have a real world monetary value, items that you can actually sell, whether that's on the Steam marketplace so I can get Steam credit and buy games, or on a third party website. So let's say I pay £1.89 to buy a case and then I've got a key for it already. I'm going to hope that I'll get a rare knife skin or weapon skin that could be worth £200, even £300. Is that any different than, say, buying a scratch card? Well, a country like Sweden is starting to think that it isn't, which could have big implications for future games. Sweden's Minister of Civil Affairs, Ardalan Shekarabi, thinks that loot boxes could be classified as gambling by 2019. Obviously, that's not far away, and when talking on Swedish radio, he said the following: "I am ready to ask our authorities to take a closer look at the phenomenon of loot boxes in the next step and see if there's a need to change legislation in order to strengthen consumer protection." Historically speaking, and I think that the reason so far that loot crates haven't been classed as gambling up until now is because it's perceived that the items don't actually hold a real life value. But when it comes to CSGO, there have been and still are websites that you can sell skins on for real money that can be withdrawn to your PayPal account, and of course you can use PayPal online to buy whatever you want, and you can even use it in some stores now. But then again, when it comes to a game like Battlefront 2 or Sea of Thieves, the value of those cosmetic items or cards really are confined to within the game itself or a personal player's preference. So there are some games that have loot boxes you pay for that grant you items that can't be used for real monetary value. That being said, I do think we could see a change in certain countries' laws to start governing loot boxes, because right now it's a bit of a wild west out there. If, say, Sweden for instance did change their law and deem that loot crates were gambling, it wouldn't stop a Swedish developer from still having a loot crate system in their game, because Swedish law only covers operations conducted in Sweden, so the features could still be valid in other countries and enabled there. However, it's not just in Sweden though. Lawmakers in Hawaii, for example, have actually put forth a pair of bills that, if enacted, could put precautions in place to prevent the sale of video games to minors where gambling mechanics were present. It would also require the odds of loot boxes to be present and disclosed before you open them. Interestingly, it was put forward by a Democrat called Chris Lee, who's been quite vocal about the Battlefront 2 loot box controversy, calling these practices predatory. An online casino for kids. If these sort of bills did take effect in, say, Hawaii or other American states, it could cause a huge headache for games developers and publishers that want to include loot crate systems in their game. First of all, if they were to have these systems in their game, they would need to ensure that each region that they're selling the game in and is operating in would abide by the correct laws. Perhaps the UK has no laws on it, but then say 10 different American states do, and maybe Sweden has banned them. The point is, it could be a real headache to govern and set up, and then you've got additional development costs of making sure that in this country loot boxes are enabled, and then in this country, if you're playing the game, you can see the odds on them, and in this country they can't be accessed at all. What I do find really interesting about this though is imagining that a loot box in a game has to have the odds of what's inside the loot crate visible at all times. And it makes me wonder how many people would buy crates knowing how likely they were to get certain items. CSGO has just had a load of new crates and weapon skins added to the game. So imagine this, let's say you buy a CSGO crate, and at the moment it does show you what you could possibly get, with a couple of question marks there too, you know, maybe you can get a blue or a purple or a rare, but imagine a scenario where you're told the actual chance of you getting a knife was something like 0.01%. Would that impact you from buying a crate or a key? I think it definitely would, and the sale of loot crates would come tumbling down. Game developers and publishers would see that as a big problem, because loot crates and microtransactions for that matter are a huge money earner for companies right now, which I suspect is why a lot of people aren't keen on them. They see it as just another way for big publishers to make more money. Activision, for example, made $4 billion from microtransactions in 2017. $4 billion. That's a big chunk of change, and that includes DLCs, microtransactions, and apparently $2 billion alone is from mobile games like Candy Crush. Overwatch, for instance, is another game that has loot boxes. EA supposedly made 800 million in the last quarter, but that does also include DLCs and other add-on content. It's not all from microtransactions or loot crates, so bear that in mind. And while we're on the topic of Electronic Arts, I read through the transcript of their most recent earnings call, and there's some really interesting stuff in here. Blake Jorgensen, who is EA's Executive VP and CFO, said that EA do not believe loot boxes and similar mechanics are gambling. He stated this in the EA earnings call, which I think is a bold stance to take. He says that plenty of governments around the world would agree with them, and I accept that, but I do think that some wouldn't agree as well. Here's a section of what he said. "We do not believe that loot boxes and similar mechanics are a form of gambling. I think there are plenty of governments around the world that would agree with us on that. And it's not just us, it's the entire industry. We work very carefully and closely with all of our industry partners and the ESA, the industry body, to make sure that people understand exactly what loot boxes are and exactly why they're not gambling. We'll continue to engage in that going forward. We think that's important, and I think there's a lot of consumers that would argue the same thing." So that's what he said. Let me put forward a scenario though. Loot crates start to get banned and developers have to jump through so many hoops in so many different regions that they decide to remove them from future games. Perhaps standard microtransactions would remain, but for this scenario, let's say that any purchasable items are removed. What would that mean for us as consumers and gamers? I think almost certainly for, say, Battlefield, you'd be looking at Premium or the Season Pass returning. Games like Sea of Thieves, which are already £50 with added microtransactions to keep the game going down the line, would probably do the same thing, and you might end up paying nearer £80 to get all of the content. I know it's hard to believe that companies do need money to keep a game's development going for a further 2 years, but on the whole I feel like it's definitely underestimated how much money it takes to make a game. They're very expensive and time consuming. That's not saying that microtransactions and loot crates don't earn companies a bucket load of money. They clearly do, and we've got the facts to back that up. They're businesses at the end of the day. But before we wish them all gone, just think of the consequences of what that could mean for us. The way I see it is there's a right way and a wrong way to do this. If we look at a game like Fortnite, for example, I think they're doing an excellent job with their cosmetics and microtransactions. The entire game is free to play, and you could never pay £1 or $1 and have exactly the same gameplay experience as anyone else on the game. Now, wrapped up in Fortnite, there are cosmetics that you can buy. For example, skins for your glider, your melee weapon, and your character. Now, in my opinion, I think the cosmetic items in Fortnite, particularly the character skins, are quite expensive, but at the same time, they look really good and they're popular, people want to buy them, and the game is free to play. These are completely optional and will not in any way affect the gameplay. So I think Epic Games are doing it really well here with Fortnite. Yeah, they're expensive, but they're optional and the game is free to play. They've created some compelling and desirable character skins there that people actually buy and spend money on. And it's very clear to the consumer exactly what they're buying. There is no loot crate, there is no random chance of getting a skin. It's just there's a shop, it rotates, there's some skins, you can buy that skin or you don't. The only thing I don't like about their system, and it's a system in other games, is that they create their own currency. In Fortnite it's called V-Bucks. And these currencies and prices are designed in a way that eventually you will have to buy like a big bulk of them to afford what you want to buy. Let's say you buy a big chunk of V-Bucks with real money and you buy a couple skins with it and you've got 500 left, but then another skin comes along which costs 700, but the minimum amount of V-Bucks you can buy, let's say, is 1,000. So that's how that system works and how they get people to spend more money. And also the fact that it's called V-Bucks rather than say dollars or pounds, which are real world currencies. When you're spending it, some people don't feel like they're spending real money, so they might buy more of it. So in a perfect world for me, they'd get rid of the V-Bucks and just have a price on there in dollars or pounds, whatever your currency is. So that way the player, the consumer, only spends exactly what they mean to. And with Battlefront 2, for example, we're still waiting to hear on exactly what the new progression system is and the microtransactions in the game, how are they going to turn out. But I think EA and DICE really have no choice but to make it cosmetic only for Battlefront 2. That's the only way that the game will redeem itself for a lot of people. If there's any form of progression or weapons or anything that you can buy in the loot crates that will affect gameplay, it's just not going to fly. It's got to be cosmetic only, and I think after what happened with Battlefront 2 and chats that I've had with people in the industry and some other controversies with loot crates and gambling in CSGO, for example, game developers and publishers will move away from that model now and just go for the cosmetic only options. I don't think that we're going to be seeing many more loot crates from AAA games, at least for the next few years. And I think from a consumer standpoint, that's definitely the right direction to go. Get rid of the loot crates and the random chances and the virtual gaming currencies, and instead have a shop with compelling cosmetic items that people want to wear, they want to show off, emotes, skins, weapon skins, whatever. If it's clear and concise what a customer is buying, and it's not going to affect the actual gameplay of the game, then we can still be in a happy place with microtransactions. So there we have it, that's all for today guys. I hope you enjoyed this one, and do let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you disliked it, a thumbs down. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one.